Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So how might we open the third eye, aka the ajna chakra, and why might we actually want to do that? Well, we're living in a society of intellects. Throughout Western education, we have kind of been placed in a box of sorts, which might be labelled PhD. That's the sort of terminal, that's the conclusion of Western education if you follow it through. So we go through this elementary system, don't we, where our minds are fractured ultimately into elements, maths, science, RS, PE, so on and so forth. And in doing so, throughout this process, unfortunately, we lose touch with holistic thinking, which may also be called holy thinking, which is problematic because the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, as René Descartes told us. And I think it was also Socrates. So what does this mean though? It means that we are sort of incarcerated by this intellect. We have been endowed with this intellect to build our own prison, but not the intelligence to see that we're actually doing it. So we have all of the hard skills. We understand the engineering. We understand so many systems and electronics and all the history and all this kind of stuff, which is great in of itself. But if there is no wisdom to accompany that, if there is no holistic thought, then we've got a big problem on our hands, and our evolution as a species is thwarted or held back. And the word religion on that note means religare, to rebind. And what this really is, when you understand the occultism behind where these words emerge, is to rebind the mind with matter. So there are a lot of like exoteric, if you like, religions that ultimately do this, but the one that's most prevalent today is statism and scientism. But we won't talk about that in great detail here. We just want to talk about how we can actually activate the third eye, the ajna chakra, or the indigo ray chakra. And we'll talk in other videos also about, how we know that these exist in the first place, because we want to approach everything scientifically. We want to, balance out the left and the right brain hemisphere. That's really where wisdom is, on the ionic column. If you're familiar with Greek architecture and traditions, you have the Corinthian, the Doric, and the Ionic, right? And so this is symbolic of feminine being the Corinthian, masculine being the Doric, and Ionic being the child of those two, which is rebirth, right? Rebirth, the baptism of fire, awakening into a higher state of consciousness. And that's what happens when you awaken the third eye. So how might you do that? At the moment, for the most part, due to the Western conditioning that we've all been through, as I've said, the intellect is actually blocking this chakra from opening up, and for us to actually realize that we are one with the universe around us, okay? There is no separation. There is only one of us here, as bizarre as that might sound. And when we understand that all of these labels that we sort of bestow on these objects, seemingly objects outside of ourselves, are just human constructs. Like really everything is just energy, everything is vibration. Mind and matter are opposite conditions of the same thing, which is ultimately nature. So what we call spirit is invisible nature, and what we call matter is visible spirit, or what we call nature itself is visible spirit. So, we don't want to get into the semantics, but ultimately we're dealing with energy. It's this infinite energy field. And so for people to actually not only intellectualize this, but to directly experience this sort of non-dualistic Buddhist concept, one needs to begin the process of contemplation. Remember, Socrates said that philosophy begins with contemplation, right? With wonder, with awe, with epistemic humility, if you like. We in the West have become so self-identified with the ego and what we've done are our achievements, our credentials, that we've forgotten that we're not what we do. We are the being having those experiences, and the being is actually at the root level, the universe, what we call the universe. And so how do we actually exercise these mental faculties and become aware of our divinity, if you like, although I don't necessarily like using some of these words that might be sort of associated with what we might call spiritualism, because we're trying to approach this in a most secular way, so we can sort of offer a bridge between the left and the right brain hemisphere, and also what we might think of in the macrocosm as the West and the East, so the Orient, Eastern philosophy, Eastern traditions. And it all lies on the ability to wonder, to daydream, to meditate and contemplate your existence. So we're talking about existential intelligence, holistic thinking. And what does that maybe look like? It looks like meditation. It looks like closing your eyes and simply occupying your mind with whatever observations come up without actually being attached to them, and letting your mind drift wherever it wants to go. And, you know, people actually possess this power as children, and we often, you know, play along with them, and we might pretend that we're like serving some ice creams and everything's just conceived in the mind. It's imagination. But this has you know, pretty much stopped the moment we step into Western school or Western education. And the imagination, even in the subjects of art, are unfortunately just about, you know, creating carbon copies of things that we're directly observing with our senses, and then just jotting them down. And they're not really celebrating the human imagination. So the human imagination is incredibly powerful when you realize what William Blake said, which was that nature is imagination itself. Like the mind, the psyche, is in fact non-local. It's ubiquitous, it's omniscient, it's all the things that we say as God, because imagination, the mind, the universe is what man calls God. But that word unfortunately has a lot of baggage, so it's another one we have to throw out. So if we're engaging in this meditation and we see ourselves from perhaps a distant perspective, if you imagine seeing yourself back, reflecting back at you, and you start to perhaps meta-think and open up a dialogue with a higher version of yourself, invariably what will happen if you spend time on your own, and this is something that's of the utmost importance, because the people around us are unfortunately like agents, right, in the Matrix. And this is also shown in the Truman Show, where people are trying to stop Truman, or Neo, from awakening to his trueness. And, you know, if you spend some time around people that are in a certain state of consciousness, perhaps here in the West, people, you know, are talking about football, or they're talking about shopping, or they're talking about this and that, whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. When you spend time around people, you sort of become an average of those people you're spending time with. But when you're left to your own devices and your mind is free to roam, you'll find that you will enter a more philosophical mindset that's actually conducive to awakening, the alchemical wedding, or the baptism of fire, as we previously alluded to. And life and reality itself will become incredibly fascinating. You will realize the deceptions that are all around us, and you will realize ultimately your oneness with the universe. But it's important for us to realize that meditation doesn't mean closing your eyes, sitting down, cross-legged on a mountain, anything like this. It simply means the process of daydreaming, the process of imagining. You can do this when you're cycling. You can do this when you're walking, more so. When you're free, you know, and there's no sort of like daily burdens or chores, activities, errands for you to be sort of weighed down by. And because here in the West, we are unfortunately trapped by this incredible matrix that's all around us, this social milieu that's just conspiring for our attention at every single turn, we'll never realize what Alan Watts said when he was, or what he meant when he said that attention is narrow perception. And it's perception that's required. Perception is a prerequisite for coming to know and coming to awakening the pineal gland or the ajna chakra, the third eye. So it's got absolutely nothing to do with what we've been taught or how the way that we've been trained what to think and not to think, ultimately. And so it's nothing to do with knowledge, it's nothing to do with intellect, it's nothing to do with anything that we've really experienced other than perhaps when we were younger, or, you know, many people who have sort of, you know, grown on their spiritual journey have, of course, reconciled and reconnected with their divine imagination. And perhaps they've experienced a Satori awakening where it happened all at once, or perhaps it's been more of a gradual process. It'd be interesting to learn about your journey in the comments below. But, you know, it's very important for us to ultimately engage in this process that we might call meditation, because we want to live in a better world, don't we? And that can only happen when we raise human consciousness. As Albert Einstein said, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. So what we need to do, once we start to pierce the illusion of matter, once we start to elevate and ascend as a species, we need to come together and realize that we are the true power here. We are the people. But unfortunately, we have a nefarious government that's up to various despotic agendas that are preventing us from reconnecting with ourselves and reconnecting with each other. So at newearth.land, we're ultimately trying to reconcile that and bring people together to become the government, for us to see that we are the 99.9% on this planet. We are the people, we are the power, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And, you know, not a moment before, when we realise that, we will start to live in a better world. Shelter, energy, food and water, those things will be basic human rights. We'll balance out some capitalists with some socialist principles. And we'll have a foundation to go forwards into a better world that works for all, not just a select few people. Like, inequality will be less of an issue when we absolutely eradicate poverty. There's no reason in the year 2022 that poverty should exist. And psychologically we're impoverished too, of course, with Monday Blues, TGI Friday. All of this is the result of an unilluminated or an unenlightened society that has yet to activate the ajna chakra, or the third eye chakra. And so this is very important for us to actually undergo this baptism of fire, this spiritual rebirth. And so that's really what this channel is all about. So, you know, I'm just going to make these videos very basic to begin with. I was making some earlier and I ran into a lot of censorship issues. But if you're interested in this kind of stuff, then do subscribe, do hang around. If you want to help build a better world, please do so at newearth.land, where we can connect, share, support, and all come together to do ultimately what the government should have been doing the whole time, but will never will. Like, they are stealing our money in tax. We now need to create a 21st century model of taxation that's transparent, optional, and truly democratic. But I will invariably start to go on a political tangent here. So I'll call it a day there. Thanks very much for watching this video. And I'll see you in the next one. And have a great day.